Hey everybody, welcome to the video. Let's go over the 10-game MLB DFS slate for today on Draftkings. But before we continue, as always, if you guys could just leave a like, and if you're new to the channel, you might as well hit that subscribe button. I'm here all season long trying to help you guys become better MLB DFS players, and I cover other sports as well. So if you're going to keep coming back to the channel each and every single day, or each and every single week, you might as well hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss out whenever I post new content. And if you can follow me over on Twitter, I'm at ChrisPennell16, CPen16 over on IG. And if you want some more content over on Patreon, always much appreciated. We got 300 plus people. You can hop into the Discord chat and you can just get access to all the extra stuff that I put out each and every single day or each and every single week depending on the sport. So if you're interested, links in the description below. If you're not, hey, that's fine. Let's just dive into today's slate. So I'm looking at the pitching options here. I got three really good, solid pitchers here in DeGrom, Gray, and Lamet. And then we have a very risky option, Robbie Ray, which I will talk about. You're not really going there in cash games. I think that is very risky because he's been pretty bad this season in terms of walks. But I like the first three guys quite a bit. So we'll start up top with the ace of the slate, and that would be Jacob DeGrom. He comes in at a massive $11,000 price tag, but I think he's fine here, especially if you have the money and the value bats to get him in. Not saying I absolutely love the salary here, but look, he's going against Miami, and he should be a safe bet for 20-plus points here. And he's one of the best pitchers in baseball, and he gets one of the best matchups in baseball, so not a lot of reasons to not like DeGrom outside of the salary here. There's no implied team total out yet for the Marlins, but I'd have to imagine it's going to be the lowest on the slate. It would not surprise me if it is below 3. But it should be the lowest on the entire slate. He also has 7.5 strikeouts in Vegas. I'd have to imagine he's going to be a pretty heavy favorite here, because I do have some interest in some of these Mets bats. I think they're a decent stack on this slate. But you got to like Jacob DeGrom. Is looking at his numbers the past two seasons, 306 xFIP, 32% K rate. Doesn't give up a lot of hard contact whatsoever, only a 5% walk rate. And if you're looking at his numbers this season, 26, 15, 29, 17, 25. He hasn't had any games that absolutely blow you away like guys like Shane Bieber have had, and even Lucas Giolito just had last night. He had, 59.1 points, complete game, shutout, no-hitter. I mean, he was just phenomenal. But I forget why I even mentioned Giolito, but had to give him a shout-out because that game was absolutely elite. So if you rostered Giolito, I'm sure you were happy last night, and especially if you avoided Cole at the same time, because that's a whole other situation that I don't really want to get into. But you got screwed pretty hard if you played Cole, because I don't even think it rained in Atlanta. So they had a happy trigger finger on calling that game a doubleheader tomorrow. But anyway, Jacob DeGrom, he's a fine option. If you're looking at the Marlins splits versus righties this season, they got a 24% K rate, a 10% walk rate, which I don't love, but 130 team ISO, very low power, and just overall not the best numbers in the world. Now, the Marlins have had some decent games this season, but look, you're going up against Jacob DeGrom. He just faced this Marlins team, and he scored 25 points versus them, so I see no reason not to like DeGrom. And actually, his past 3 starts are not going to be versus the Marlins. He just faced the Marlins 2 starts ago, the Marlins last start, and then he's going to make another start versus the Marlins. But you got to like DeGrom here. If you got the money for him, I think he's an excellent option. If you don't have the money for DeGrom, I love the price tags on Sonny Gray and Nelson Lamet, and I also like their matchups as well. So we'll start with Sonny Gray. 8,800. He gets a matchup versus the Brewers. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. The Brewers, they got Yelich. They got some decent bats. And Trevor Bauer just to give up 4 runs versus them. But they're striking out a lot versus right-handed pitching, and Sonny Gray's been pretty darn solid to start the season. And we know he's got ace-level stuff. Now, if I just do a quick reading of the game log, 30, 39, 27, 12, 33, and 16. Now, actually, his worst start of the season was versus Milwaukee, where he scored 12 points. But this is a good matchup on paper for Sonny Gray. If you're looking at their splits versus righties this season, they have a 27.2% K rate, 7% walk rate, 198 batting average, which is pretty horrendous, and only a 66 WRC+. So I like the spot here for Sonny Gray. If you're looking at his numbers the past 2 seasons, he had a 30% K rate, which is great, 3.48 xFIP, high ground ball rate, doesn't give a lot of hard contact, only 0.85 home runs per 9 innings. I think he's an excellent option here. He's tough on lefties, he's tough on righties, so I don't really care who's on the what side of the plate he's facing. He should have a pretty good game here. I like that price tag as well. It has came down because he was 9K plus in his past 3 starts, and at 8,800, I don't mind that price whatsoever. 4.09 runs against him in Vegas, 53% chance for the win, and 6.5 strikeouts. So I think Sonny Gray is an excellent pivot off of Jacob DeGrom for about $2,000 cheaper. Then Nelson Lamet here at 8,600. He's been another pitcher that's had a really strong start to the season. Now just do the usual quick reading of the game log. 25, 17, 11 versus the Dodgers, so get a free pass there. Then 37, 25, and 22. Now he's facing a Seattle team, which I know kind of just beat up Chris Paddock, but look, Lamet's got plenty of upside here, and he's a better strikeout pitcher. If you're looking at the past 2 seasons combined for Lamet, he's got the highest strikeout rate in the slate, actually, at 34%. Does give a little bit up in the walk department at 9%, but overall, I like Lamet here. I mean, Vegas likes him too, only 3.46 runs against him, which is one of the lowest on the entire slate. Really heavy favorite here, 67% chance for the win, and 7 strikeouts. And we saw his pitch count as high as it ever was this season so far in his last start at 97 pitches when he struck out 9 Texas Rangers. So I think Lamet here is a fine option. If you're looking at the Mariners splits versus righties this season, it's not terrible. It's really not. 22% K rate, 8% walk rate, 151 ISO, 305 open, and 96 WRC+. That's not awful, but for the most part, I think Lamet can rack up some strikeouts here and have a pretty solid outing. So I'm really liking the first 3 pitchers. If you're playing cash games or single under GPPs, I'm probably looking to fit 2, obviously 2, but 2 of those 3 guys. I'm not really looking to play Robbie Ray much in cash, or not much at all. I'm not looking to play Robbie Ray in cash games, but in tournaments, I think he's somewhat interesting here. Now, I will say the walks have been absolutely awful this season. He is walking batters at an insane rate. I think he's around a 20% walk rate this season, which is obviously not great. I mean, I'll just read these walk numbers for you guys. He's at 5, 6, 3, 2, 6, and 3. That's pretty darn bad. Now, the strikeouts haven't been terrible. He did strike out 8 in his last start, and he's not putting up, like, every single start hasn't been terrible fantasy-wise if you just factor in a 6,900 price tag. Like, he scored 12, 13, then 2 in Coors Field, and 10, 1 versus the Dodgers. You pretty much get a pass versus the Dodgers, and then 12 points versus San Diego. Those aren't great numbers, but he's also only 6,900, which I believe is the 3rd cheapest he's been this season. He's been hovering around that 7K range, and below 7K, I think he's pretty interesting here in tournaments just because you're getting the Rockies away from Coors Field. Now, I know Arizona's not the best pitcher's park right now because it's super hot there, and the ball is going to travel. I believe it's supposed to be 110 degrees tomorrow, so look, not optimal pitching conditions here, but there's some upside here. He's still got a decent strikeout rate. If you're looking at the past 2 seasons for Robbie Ray, 31% K rate. Now, the walk rate, 12%. This season it's close to 20. He's been horrendous in that category. 4.14 xFIP, 1.74 home runs per 9 innings, 44% hard contact rate. Look, it's not going to feel great to play Robbie Ray, but if you're looking to spend up on bats, I think he's somewhat interesting here just because the Rockies are a worse team away from Coors Field. But that's not to say I don't like Nolan Arenado and Trevor Story tonight. I think those are both elite options on this slate, so even though I think Robbie Ray is somewhat interesting, I don't think he's going to throw a complete game shutout here. I think someone like Nolan Arenado and Trevor Story could certainly do some damage. I think he probably is going to give up 2 to 4 runs here, but you're just kind of hoping the strikeout range is around 6 to 8. And I think if that's what happens, I think he is going to be viable at 6,900. There just really wasn't any other cheap pitchers I liked. So the first 3 guys are more of the core pitchers, and DeGrom, Gray, and Lamet, or Lamet, whatever. And then Robbie Ray is your GPP, not punt option, but he's your GPP cheap option to spend it for your bats. Vegas has 4.57 runs against him, which is actually lower than I thought it would be. Slight favorite here, 53% chance for the win, and 6 strikeouts in Vegas. So if he can get 6 strikeouts, or even a little bit above that, and give up 2 to 4 runs, I think he'll be okay. But it would not surprise me if he just walks 12 batters here and gives up 7 runs. But I think he's a decent tournament option. Decent tournament option. So let's move on to the bats now. That's pretty much it for the pitching. And we'll start up top here with Stephen Vogt at 4,000 going up against John Gray, who has really struggled for the most part this season. Now, John Gray was someone actually considered putting on the pitching sheet just because of the price tag, but, I couldn't do it. He's just not been great this season, and this is going to be pretty prime hitting conditions. I mean, Vegas has them at nearly 5 runs, the Diamondbacks. I actually think they're one of the better value stacks on the slate because they're actually not that expensive. Stephen Vogt's 4K. Christian Walker, I believe, is 3,800. And then you got Peralta and Calhoun are both cheap. And then Ketel Marte and Eduardo Escobar aren't going to break the bank either. So Diamondbacks are probably going to grade out as one of the better stacks on the slate, especially point per dollar wise, because John Gray has really struggled. And he's going to face a lot of lefties here. And typically you like lefties versus John Gray. If you're looking at his splits, double-digit walk rate, 22% K rate, 185 ISO. Those numbers are all worse compared to what they are versus righties. So I like all the lefties here for the Diamondbacks. You can also use Starling Marte and Christian Walker in tournaments, but I pretty much singled out the lefties here for the most part. And Stephen Vogt, he's got some pretty decent power numbers versus right-handed pitching, so yes, he makes some sense. But I feel like most people are going to just plug in Victor Caratini. He's only 3,000, and I feel like pretty much everyone is doing that every single night the past few starts, and I got to update that. It's Michael Fulmer starting for the Detroit Tigers. Okay, sorry, that's fixed. I got Michael Fulmer in there now. Obviously, he doesn't go too deep into games. He's pretty much more of a extended opener, but either way, we should see a couple of innings here out of Michael Fulmer, a few innings, and Caratini's just too cheap. I believe he was like almost 70% last night. He's also very chalky the night before. Then I think the night before that, he was decently owned as well, and he's only 3,000, and if you're looking at his splits, they're all right here versus righties. 186 ISO, 270 batting average, and the Cubs, they check in as one of the better stacks on these slate. I believe they have the highest team total currently at 5.39. Now, there's a few teams that don't have totals out yet, but I think that's the Mets and the Cardinals potentially, which I don't see both. I don't see either of those guys having higher totals than 5.39. So I think the Cubs probably going to check in as the best stack on the slate Vegas-wise, and I can agree with that. Fulmer's not been great this season, and Detroit's bullpen's not great either, so I think you can certainly load up on these Cubs bats, even though they really disappointed last night versus who were they? Who was the pitcher for the Tigers? Oh yeah, Spencer Turnbull. I really thought the Cubs would have a decent game versus the Spencer Turnbull and the Detroit Tigers bullpen, but apparently not. And a lot of people did as well. They were pretty high owned, but oh well. I mean, it's just one game. I think they can certainly bounce back here. And Caratini, I like the price tag. And then drop it down to first base, you have Anthony Rizzo. He comes in at 5,300. Now, he's super expensive, and he's not been hitting that great this season. But if you're stacking the Cubs and you got the money for him, I think he's fine. But I really don't think you're going to end up here in cash games because of that massive price tag. I'd rather spend up at other positions, someone like Trevor Story or even Nolan Arenado, going up against lefties in Arizona, which I think there's some pretty good spots here. But Anthony Rizzo is fine. He's great versus right-handed pitching, and they have the highest team total in Vegas currently, and 403 WOBA to righties, 150 WRC plus, 307 batting average, and just overall some really elite numbers here. So I don't mind Anthony Rizzo. If you have a spend up option and you have 5,300 left and you're looking for a first baseman, you plug in Rizzo. I think you can be pretty confident about that. If you want to save some money for a mid-range option here, we have Eric Hosmer at 4,200 going up against Taijuan Walker. Now, Taijuan Walker has not been bad so far this season, but I will side with the Padres, and Vegas likes them too. They have a team total of over 5 on this slate, and Hosmer's been pretty good versus right-handed pitching, especially this season. But last year, 276 batting average, did strike out quite a bit, 184 ISO, but he's been hitting decently well this year. I believe he just homered just a little bit ago, and I was looking at the MLB at bat, so I think he just homered. But either way, I do like the lefties here versus Taijuan Walker. You can use the righties too into Tatis and Machado. I didn't list them on here just because I prefer them versus lefties, and I don't want to list the entire slate. But just know you can full stack the Padres on this slate, and I would have no issues with that. But I just specifically targeted some of these lefties on here. I think I only put Hosmer and Trent Grisham actually, but the entire lineup is playable. Then if you need a cheap option, you have Miguel Cabrera here at 2,700 going against a lefty, and John Lester. Detroit doesn't make a terrible value stack on this slate. They have a team total of 4.61, and John Lester has certainly been hittable this season. He is no longer a very good pitcher these days. He's pretty much average to below average. I mean, he's got some decent starts in him still, but for the most part, he's someone we can certainly use righties against. And Miguel Cabrera has actually got some decent numbers versus lefties for someone that's only 2,700. Over a 200 ISO versus them last season, a 154 WRC plus, a 340 batting average, and just overall some pretty darn good numbers. If you're looking at Lester's splits, someone we can certainly use righties against. 183 ISO giving up a 340 WOBA. He actually struggled versus lefties as well, but mainly just targeting some of the righties, and there's a lot of righties in this lineup. So Miguel Cabrera is fine. You could also look at a couple of other guys like Jonathan Scope and a few others off that I'm not remembering off the top of my head. So I don't mind Miggy here. Then dropping down to second base, we have Ketel Marte at 4,800. John Gray's just not been that great this season. He's had a couple of decent starts. I think he scored nearly 30 points in one outing, but I'm going to side with the Diamondbacks here, and Vegas does as well. 5 applied team total nearly. It's a good hitter's park in Arizona, especially with the roofs open. It's going to be 110 degrees. The ball should fly. And you're looking at his splits, he's better versus lefties, but he's still got some pretty darn good numbers versus right-handed pitching. Over a 400 WOBA, 250 ISO, 327 batting average, and 577 slugging. Just pretty elite numbers, and I like the lefties here versus John Gray. So I think Ketel Marte is a fine option if you're stacking up the Diamondbacks, or you can use him as a one-off as well. Jonathan Scope, I believe he hit a grand slam last night, or this night, whenever you're watching this video. I guess it's 12 o'clock, so last night he did hit a grand slam. 4,400. He hits lefties pretty well. If you're looking at his splits, he had a near 300 ISO to lefties last season, a 136 WRC plus, a 277 batting average. Did strike out quite a bit, but I think Scope's interesting here versus the lefty John Lester, who does give it up a bit to right-handed bats. Then Colton Wong, he did nothing last night, but he's only 3,300. I believe he was around 80% on cash games. I could see him being popular once again. The price just makes sense, and I think the Cardinals are going to have a decently high team total on this line. They do grade out as a pretty good stack point per dollar wise. They're not that expensive. Besides a couple guys like Paul Goldschmidt and, who else is the other expensive guy? Can't remember off the top of my head. But yeah, Paul Goldschmidt's expensive. But for the most part, you can pretty easily stack this squad up. Both sides of the plate are fine here versus Jacob Junis. He gives up power to both sides. If you're looking at Junis' splits, 177 ISO to lefties and 210 ISO to righties. 21% K rate, 20. I mean, they're pretty similar numbers versus both sides. Higher WOBA to lefties, but higher ISO to righties. Both sides of the plate are fine here. And Colton Wong, not a big power guy, but he's a high contact hitter. If you're looking at his splits, only 15% K rate to righties. 370 on base percentage, 283 batting average. I think he's fine at 3,300. Probably going to end up being pretty popular once again. Then Jason Kipnis, he gets low in the order, 3,100, but I do like the lefties here versus Michael Fulmer. I think they make a pretty solid stack on this slate. Highest team total in Vegas right now. And Kipnis, he's got over 200 ISO to righties, 91 WRC plus, which isn't great, but he's got some decent pop versus them. That's pretty much the only good thing I can say about Jason Kipnis. Then dropping down to third base, we have Nolan Arenado at 4,900. He's having a pretty darn good game right now. And he's less than 5K going up against a lefty. And look, I think the Rockies, I think they should have a higher team total than 4.57. I think Robbie Ray's getting a little bit much respect. I think he's getting more respect than he should in Vegas right here. But I think Robbie Ray's interesting in tournaments, but the two bats that scare me the most are Nolan Arenado and Trevor Story. I think they're totally playable here. And look, Robbie Ray has struggled so far this year, and he's been just serving up walks and serving up some power as well. And we know Arenado is one of the best bats in the league versus left-handed pitching, near 300 ISO versus them, 611 slugging, 315 batting average. You can certainly use Arenado and Story on this slate. I have no issues with that, but I do think Robbie Ray is interesting in tournaments, just because he can rack up strikeouts. Then Tommy Edman, 4,300 switch hitter. He actually hits left-handed pitching a little bit better here, 262 ISO compared to a 174 ISO to righties, but he's still good versus righties. He has a near 300 batting average last season, doesn't strike out a whole lot. 341 WOBA, 339 on base percentage, 113 WRC plus. They're still fine numbers, better versus lefties, but still fine numbers versus righties. And I think both sides of the play here are in play versus Jacob Junis. So I don't mind Tommy Edman at only 4,300. Matt Carpenter, he did not make the lineup last night because he's just been absolutely slumping this season. So if he's not back in the lineup and Brad Miller starting again, I think he's 4,100, 4,000. I think he's a fine option. I mean, he hits right-handed pitching very, very well. I think he had over a 300 ISO to righties last season, so he would certainly be playable. But if Matt Carpenter does make the lineup at only 3,500, I think he'd be an okay option. Maybe a day off was good to clear his head. Maybe he'll come back strong. I don't know, but overall, he does profile pretty well here versus Jacob Junis. Matt Carpenter, I mean, look, if you're looking at his numbers last season, there wasn't a ton of power versus either sides of the plate. 120 ISO to lefties, 177 to righties, but more power to righties, and he's okay. He grades out pretty well here versus a righty. Batting cleanup, only 3,500, so I don't mind Matt Carpenter. Eduardo Escobar, if you just want to continue with that Diamondback stack that I do think is pretty interesting tonight versus John Gray. Now, if we're looking at his splits, he's actually better versus lefties, kind of like with Ketel Marte, but he's still pretty solid versus both sides of the plate. I mean, if you're looking at his numbers versus righties, the batting average comes down to 256, but still a 236 ISO. And just overall okay numbers, doesn't strike out a whole lot at only 19%. So I think Eduardo Escobar is fine. The price tag's nice. He hasn't been hitting amazing this season, but looking for second the D-backs, I think he's interesting. Then dropping down to shortstop, we have Trevor Story, who's also having a very good game right now versus the Diamondbacks currently. The game is not over yet, but last I saw, him and Arenado were both doing pretty well. I know Trevor Story started the game with a triple, I believe. And Arenado, I believe, got the RBI and knocked him in. But look, like Trevor Story here, he's great versus lefties. I think he's got some pretty decent history versus Robbie Ray as well. Yes, another way from Coors Field, but look, the ball should be able to fly here in Arizona. And Robbie Ray, he's been pretty much a hot mess this season. He can get some strikeouts, but he's walking guys at an insane rate. He's definitely giving up power as well. So I don't mind Trevor Story. He's got elite numbers here versus lefties. And if you're looking at Ray's splits, he gives up over a 200 ISO to righties, 31% K rate. But look, the walk rate's high, and if you just mix in this season, that's even way higher than that. So definitely think Story and Arenado are interesting on the Rockies. But outside of them, I'm not really looking to target them. You could look Charlie Blackmon's way in tournaments just to get different, because Blackmon does have some good history versus Robbie Ray, but really just prefer those two power righties there. Javi Baez, 4,900. I prefer him versus lefties, and the guy just loves chasing balls out of the zones. I remember when it was the first, or a couple of nights ago, when he had that double dong night. His first at-bat, I mean, I think Casey Mize threw a slider like 17 feet off the plate, and you just see Javi Baez swinging at it. It's like, oh my gosh. But he made up for it, 2 home runs. That's the thing. You can be all or nothing, but when it's all, I mean, you're usually sitting pretty darn well in DFS. Now, he's very expensive at 4,900. I hate the price tag, but there's certainly upside here. Now, he's got better numbers versus lefties. That's when he got his 2 home runs was versus lefties, but still, or no, his first home run was versus a lefty. I think his second one was versus a righty, but still, numbers versus lefties, but 235 ISO to righties, which is still fine. Does strike out a lot at 28%, but he's an okay option if you are stacking the Cubs, but I do prefer the lefties for the most part. Then Nico Goodrum, 4,200 going against John Lester. Nico Goodrum's got some pretty good splits versus lefties. He's not that great versus righties, but to lefties, 361 batting average compared to only 215 to righties, 143 WRC plus, 411 WOBA, and 411 on base percentage and a 388 WOBA. So definitely think Nico Goodrum is certainly playable here, and I would not even rule out a Detroit stack versus John Lester. Then Paul DeJong at 4K. He did okay last night, and look, he's actually got some decent power versus righties, better than they were versus lefties last season, with a 228 ISO to righties, 329 WOBA, 104 WRC plus, 460 slugging. Not a high batting average guy, but there's some decent pop there, and Jacob Junis does give him more power to righties compared to lefties, so you're kind of getting, I wouldn't really call Jacob Junis reverse splits, but he gave it more power to righties and DeJong more power to righties, so I guess you could call it somewhat of a reverse splits matchup. So don't mind the price tag there at only 4K. Then dropping out to the outfield, I'd like really none of the expensive outfielders. Are Cody Bellinger and Mookie Betts playable? Certainly, I wouldn't talk you out of them, but just really think the way I'm going to build my lineups, I just can't see myself being able to fit those guys in, so I didn't put them on here because I think I'm going to spend up for pitching a little bit, and I would rather spend up in the infield for the most part because outfield usually has quite a few good value options, and I think that's the case again. So we'll start with Kyle Schwarber here at only 4,400, but 4,400. Last night he was, I believe, 4,100. The price is coming up. I believe a couple of nights before that he was below 4K, but I still like him here versus Michael Fulmer. The Cubs do check in as the best stack on the slate Vegas-wise. You don't have to agree with Vegas, but just Vegas-wise, they're the best stack on the slate with the highest implied team total. And he's certainly got some good power versus righties with a near 300 ISO, 552 slugging, 255 batting average is low, and he also has that high strikeout rate. But Schwarber's definitely got some double dunk upside, and he actually got a steal last night, which was fun to see. So if you like Kyle Schwarber, I don't expect him to swipe any more bags, but I think he's a fine option at 4,400. Ian Happ, 4,300. He hasn't really been doing much for me lately, but he's going to be leading off, and I like the Cubs, and he's got some good power versus righties. 318 ISO, 381 WOBA, 591 slugging. He's a fine option. I think both are certainly playable. And then dropping down to Michael Conforto at 4,100. I've not talked about any of the Mets yet, but I think they're going to be a decent stack here. It would not surprise me if their team total is around 5. I don't think it's going to be above 5, but it would not surprise me if it's around 4.8 to 5 because Hernandez is someone that really struggles with lefties, and there's plenty of lefties in this lineup, including Michael Conforto, who I think is the best play on the Mets today. If you're looking at his numbers, he's got a 280 ISO to righties, 382 WOBA, 382 on base percentage, 141 WRC plus. And if you're looking at Hernandez's splits, I mean, he's not that great versus the other side of the plate, but certainly we can use lefties versus him. A very high fly ball rate, double-digit walk rate, 308 ISO given up, and a 372 WOBA. So, like the lefties here, Michael Conforto and Brandon Nimmo are my favorite plays on the Mets. Trent Grisham, I believe I only mentioned one other Padre, but again, I said that you can pretty much stack this entire lineup. I do prefer a couple of these lefties here for the most part, and they do make some solid cash game plays because of their price tags. But Trent Grisham, 3,900 going against Taijuan Walker. Padres have a team total of over 5 on this slate, and he's got some decent splits versus both sides of the plate, but going to prefer him versus righties here. If looking at his numbers last season, 177 ISO, but these numbers have all improved, and he's got better plate discipline, so Trent Grisham at 3,900, I think he's a fine option. Cole Calhoun, 3,900, just continuing this Arizona stack versus John Gray. I hate saying that because I do like John Gray. I liked him in previous years, but I don't know. He's just struggled to start the season. I know his past couple of starts were versus the Dodgers, and then he was in Coors Field. So maybe I should cut him a little bit of slack, but Vegas really isn't. And he's just not been that good this season. So Cole Calhoun versus a righty, I think he's fine. He's a high strikeout guy, not a high batting average guy, but he's got some decent pop. 245 ISO to righties last season. And John Gray, he is someone that does struggle with lefties. So like Calhoun, Steven Piscotty, 3,600. I almost said the Astros. I think the Athletics are a pretty decent stack here, but the problem is they're all super expensive. Chapman, Simeon, Chris Davis is actually decently cheap, which I don't even have him on here, but maybe I should, but I prefer the other guys around him just because Chris Davis has not been that great this year. Then you also got Kana, Laureano, so they're a good stack. They're just super expensive, so I couldn't just list all these guys and say, just play them all because that's not going to be really possible if you're spending up for pitching in the slightest. So I like Piscotty here the most point per dollar wise. He should be hitting to the top of the order. Only 3,600. He's got elite numbers versus lefties. A 267 ISO, 419 WOBA, 169 WRC plus, a 360 batting average. Kobe Allard has not been very good this season. Last year, he had some decent splits in limited time. 122 ISO giving up the righties and 15% strikeout rate, which is not encouraging. But this year, not been that great. And Steven Piscotty at this price tag, I like him a lot here. So Steven Piscotty, a very, very good play. David Peralta, 3,600. And just another lefty versus John Gray. He's got some similar splits here to Cole Calhoun. Less power, but a better contact rate. I mean, I don't really want to too in-depth there. You guys get the idea by now. I like lefties versus John Gray in Arizona. Brandon Nimmo, a similar play to Michael Conforto, but Nimmo's been hitting the ball very well recently. It's just another lefty bat versus Hernandez, who really does struggle versus them. Then Jason Hayward, if you just need a really cheap Cub lefty, I don't mind that. Now, he's not going up against Tyler Chatwood. I think I dragged down the wrong, had the formula wrong. But Michael Fulmer, look, he's not been great this season. Detroit's bullpen's not that great, and Cubs do check in as the highest team total on the slate currently. So Jason Hayward at only 2,600. He's got some decent pop versus righties, 202 ISO, just some overall decent numbers. I know he's not been great this year, but I think he's okay. But that's pretty much going to be it for the video, guys. I hope it was helpful. If it was, remember to leave a like. If you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. Really helps me out, and I really do appreciate it. And I think that's pretty much it. So I hope you guys enjoy your Wednesday, and looking forward to the weekend coming up.